Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, and I will be your host for the next hour, maybe a little longer. We might be staying after school today. We've got a lot to talk about. You've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. It is a Monday morning, nice, beautiful, rainy Monday morning here in the hinterlands of Utah, Monday, April 23rd. Year of our Lord 2018. You can hear us, watch us live on YouTube. We're on Facebook. You can find us facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. And we have a fan page, facebook.com/CRN. Jeff and I and the network, we're kind of kicking around over on WeMe. It's kind of dead. I'm, in all honesty, kind of just keeping that for next time. And I know there will be one. I land in Facebook jail. I think next go around, I'm a repeat offender. It's probably going to be 30 days in the hole for me. So we will have a backup on WeMe. And these guys also, we have their other Facebook pages. Like I said, facebook.com. My other one is facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman, Cowgirl Esquire. I have another one, my news page. I changed the name. It's now called Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report Radio Show. Twitter handle, Cowgirl Esquire. And we do have an app, and we have a Radio Co. link there where you can listen to our shows. Jeff Johnson and Daniel Bailey, the founders of the network, did one last night, the Renegade and the Rambler Radio Network. And they talked about, what did we talk about last night, Jeff? I was on with you for a little while, and then our neighbors were burning the field, so I had to go and watch the fires. So you can catch a repeat of that show. And let's see, the Bailey Report, Paradigm Shift. Jeff usually goes on before me on Mondays, but Jeff, we were a little bit slow going this morning. Our goal was to do a little bit of Facebook Live presentation. I've been having some back issues, and as we were burning fire that got a little out of control as we're burning the fields on Sunday afternoon, I'm a little bit out of commission, so not quite bright-eyed and bushy-tailed yet, and we're not going to do that to our fans. But we will be doing that and just trying to add some new dimensions to what we have for you guys. We also have some shows that aren't original, but they do show up on our little feed here. The Other Side with Justin and Mike. They are two high school teachers. They've done some great shows on economics, on Lincoln and the debunking the myths of the Civil War. In other words, one of the things people don't like is when we slay the sacred cow, Saint Lincoln. But these guys followed Tommy DiLorenzo's book very well and did an outstanding job. So thanks for doing the heavy lifting on that one, guys. Brush Fires of Freedom, a show coming out of Tucson, Arizona. And that is rebroadcast. That goes live on Sunday afternoons. Mike Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center. He also has sent us some of his podcasts with Peter Schiff of Schiff Gold. So if you're interested in learning in the wisdom of investing in gold, you can hear that as well. And we are working on getting a feed where you can download our content so you don't have to do it from YouTube as well. We do have a YouTube channel, Cerberus Radio Network. We'd like you to subscribe. I know we're trying to get away from YouTube and get onto other options for you to listen, but this is what we have now. Got a great guest today. Jeff Johnson is producing, and he will also be joining us in the conversation today, since he's not doing his own show and he's producing for me when he's got a lot to do today. So thank you, Jeff. Brian Duff from Mind for Survival. He and I did a podcast last week on his show, and we talked about the legalities and what you need to be aware of if you need to use lethal force. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit today. And we're going to bring him in a little while. And let's see, a couple of announcements. I will be on K-Talk tomorrow morning on the Inside the News show with Paul Jensen. Jacob Hibbard is taking over that show, and they're sharing the time slot for now. And Ben McClintock from Defending Utah will be joining us. Sure, we'll be covering some of what happened in the Utah caucus, which took place over the weekend. And good news, Mitt for Brains Romney did not get the accepted nod. He was anticipating, I'm sure, the promise of Utah, the peasants of Utah benefiting from his political connections, didn't appeal. He took second place in the caucus, 49 to 51% to a guy named Mike Kennedy. So that'll be interesting. Those clowns in the GOP can do what they want. I am going to vote for the only candidate who is against the foreign intervention, Syria, and all the other debacles that we have over there, and that is Craig Bowden. I've talked about him before, so please consider supporting Craig Bowden for the Libertarian Party if you've had it like I have with all this intervention in Syria, the lies to get into more wars. Anyway, that's a topic for another show. Big announcement also, PrepperCon returning to the Utah area in Sandy, Utah. And that will be May 18th and 19th. Jeff Johnson is coming out. We will be broadcasting that weekend. We'll be doing some broadcasting from the event if that's possible. Definitely some Facebook Lives. Last year at the outdoor exhibit in Salt Lake City, I had a great Facebook presentation, live presentation with EJ Snyder, Naked and Afraid star. He was dressed, and we had hundreds of listeners, probably up to 1,000 by now, and it was a really good presentation there. Stan Pruitt from Urban Survival will be there. He's going to be coming on the show to talk about that as well. My good friend Michael Hawk, and he's a former Discovery Channel superstar, as well as Tim Ralston, he's an inventor, and he's been on my show as well, in my old show, The Suzanne Option. So it's going to be really exciting. And other news, we're going to be talking about an article that just came out. Carl Jones, if you remember him, we did an article on national reciprocity. It really made a lot of coverage, made it around the internet. A lot of people read it, and we took the position that it was a Trojan horse. A lot of people think, well, the GOP's, our guys are in charge right now. We need to expand gun rights. If you have not read that, I urge you to get to it. It is by the 10th Amendment Center, and it is called National Reciprocity is a Trojan Horse. And just right now, I'm going to pull up the other article. And this is one that just came out, that's called Muskets to AR-15, and Are They Weapons of War or Enemies of Tyranny? That is put out by the 10th Amendment Center. And again, I'm going to be getting into that. But let me introduce right now my friend Brian Duff, Mind for Survival. He tried to come on the show once before, and we had a horrible phone connection. He has relocated now, and we are live sharing a internet connection together, trying not to do this over the cell phone waves. And he's sounding really good. Brian, good morning.
Good morning, Suzanne. How are you doing today?
I am up and feeling a lot better than I was yesterday. Boy, I have a newfound respect for firefighters. I think what I'd like to include in our discussion today is what to do if you are confronted with a fire, and your show is all about preparedness, but you also call it Mind for Survival. And one of the things I've always talked about is it doesn't matter what kind of tools or skills you have. If you don't have the mind to survive, they will do you no good whatsoever. That being said, let's have a little introduction of your background and your Mind for Survival website.
Well, thank you. I am all over the map in my background, but I started off years ago. I grew up in Los Angeles, was very big into the outdoors. I was in the Boy Scouts and all that, and went from being a Boy Scout to being a lifeguard to being an EMT, eventually a firefighter paramedic in Southern California. After a while, and I know a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I kind of got bored with the firefighter life, and I joined the Army, and I really didn't know what I was getting into, but ended up as a Army Ranger assigned to the 3rd Ranger Battalion in Fort Benning, Georgia. Did that for a bunch of years, got out, went back to being a paramedic, bounced around, and eventually the wars overseas kicked off, and I was hired to go overseas and work as a security contractor for the government. I did that in a bunch of different positions, bounced around between Africa, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, other places for about 10 years, came home. I was an international security director, and now I've relocated out to Las Vegas, where I run a tactical medical training facility and jabber on the internet as much as possible in my podcast.
You have a great podcast. Tell people about it and how they can tune in.
My podcast is named Mind for Survival. You can find it at mindforsurvival.com. It's on Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and all of that. Super easy to find. You can also follow me on Facebook at Mind for Survival, Instagram, Twitter as well. So it's super easy to get a hold of me.
You also have a Facebook page that people can join, and you post some fantastic advice. Let's tell people how to follow that one.
Yeah, so if they go just put Mine for Survival into the Facebook search bar, it'll come up with the Facebook page and also the Facebook group. By all means, go ahead and join the Facebook group. I love the people that are in there. They put some great information together, and they really supportive of helping each other out with preparedness. So just Mine for Survival in the groups and the page. When you go to the page, just click the little thumbs up like button, and you'll be included in all the future emails that we push out from there.
And it is a great group. I'm a member of it. I believe Jeff is as well. Jeff, by the way, if you didn't know, is also a former firefighter EMT. So it's great to have you both in on this discussion today. Frequently, you know, I have what I consider two kind of camps of main followers. And those, as you're aware, Brian, are heavily on the political side. I talk about it all the time with an emphasis of constitutional history and the proper role of government. If any of your listeners are about to turn this off right now, let me tell you, I am not aligned to any political party politics. In fact, I take a lot of heat. We are consistent intellectually. We are about ideas and not ideologues. You know, pardon my use of the N-word, but I like to say we are a nation of laws, not men. So if Donald Trump does something I disagree with, I will disagree. I will not be somebody who will complain about the Affordable Care Act and cheer on something equally as unconstitutional, such as national reciprocity. So we focus on that. We focus on limited government, and people are really starting to hear our message, because we don't just stand loyal to one individual when they do something blatantly unconstitutional or immoral. So if they do something we like, we will admit it. We will say this is really good. But just because Donald Trump is a Republican doesn't mean he's going to get the nod or the seal of approval from those of us here at the Cerberus Radio Network. We are, again, about freedom and liberty. So that being said, we like to remain consistent. And what I also try to do is a lot of the people that are of the preparedness camp don't care to talk about politics, because typically what political discussions devolve into is one side or the other, one party or the other, liberals versus conservative, failing to see that both sides typically are arguing a position that is not conservative. It really goes towards progressivism and big government on both sides. So our focus here is limited government, the proper role of government. If we can combine, and I'm probably the only one crazy enough to do it, although I'm going to get into this a little bit. Mark Levin just had a show on EMPs because somebody else from Fox had it. So Mark is a little bit late to the party, as always, as he was on the Article 5 convention issue. But, you know, the more people that get the preparedness message, the better, I suppose. If we could enlighten him on St. Lincoln and the true causes of the War of Northern Aggression, that would be great too, but I'll take it piecemeal. Anyway, so we had an article that just came out, and this is kind of tying the two together now. I'm going to talk about weapons of war or enemies of tyranny, muskets to AR-15s. And my goal here is tying in someone like Brian, who knows about preparedness, who knows about the survival mindset, who's also a military veteran. His thoughts on this and his input is going to be very important. If we could tie that into our goal of the proper role in government and politics in that light, I always say that we are headed for some very dark trouble. We're headed for some troubling times. If we could combine the preparedness camp with the camp that understands the proper role in government, not only will we survive the storm, but we will come from it educated and enlightened and try to avoid the same mistakes again. Is it possible? Is it beyond the abilities of human nature at this point to avoid oppressive, tyrannical governments? Are we just now hardwired to wanting to have government do everything for us? I don't know. But my goal is to try and avoid that. I want to leave this world knowing I've tried to make it better for those that are following behind. So that's a little bit more of our mission statement. Brian, do you have anything to chime in before I get into this article?
No, I think it's great. I've read your articles and I've been following you for a long time. And one thing with the preparedness community is people in the preparedness community are political, But I think what happens is when you bring the politics into it and you start where it starts running down maybe some of the conspiracy, and not necessarily the conspiracies, they could be true, but they start going down that road, then the discussion changes from preparedness into a big discussion on politics. So that's why, like on my show, I try to keep them separate, because we got great shows like yours that we can come on and listen to politics and get a ton of great information, and then shows like mine that focus on the preparedness. So I think it's out there, and I think hopefully we're moving in the right direction. We'll see.
I think so. And we've had some, like I said, some interactions on this stuff before. You've allowed me to promote our show for your Christmas special and your lethal force issue we had. I think we make a great team. And I know that we've also gotten permission to play some of your shows on our lineup. So if you want to hear more Brian's things, again, go over to his, and then stay tuned on our app. Anytime you push this 24/7, you will hear some quality program. I'm very proud of what we have to offer for our listeners. We are a growing network, and I have people questioning all the time if they can come on and host too. So we have some of those things in the works. So this came out yesterday. One of the aspects I've been noticing in this whole gun control debate is the means by which or the phenomena that we have accepted the fact that military weapons should never be in the hands of civilians. Even the most staunch gun rights advocates have capitulated that point, and nobody's talking about it. And maybe this seems extreme to say that, yes, we should have the same weapons that the military has when we're talking about firearms. But is that really extreme, or is what seems extreme the actual intent, the heart and soul, I say, of the Second Amendment? And that was the purpose of this article, to examine that and get into the origins of the militia and the standing army, how the two were distinguished, and how the founding generation felt about that. Jeff, if you want to say anything before I start, otherwise I'm gonna rock and roll with this. But if you want to have any comments, now is your time.
Take off.
All right.
Go for it.
So my article starts out here with the introduction. Many people simultaneously claim to support the Second Amendment while insisting the federal government should be able to ban military-style weapons. And these are actually mutually exclusive positions. In fact, while the whole purpose of the Second Amendment was to ensure that the people would always have access to what they call weapons of war. And here is an example of something inconsistent, that I didn't like about candidate Trump when he was talking about national reciprocity. And he said, I respect the Second Amendment, but we need to enforce the gun laws we already have in place, meaning those that are in violation of the Second Amendment. So we have these politicians speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Either that, or they don't truly understand what they say they respect. So as we know, on February 14th of this year, Nicholas Cruz shot and killed 17 students in Parkland, Florida. And Cruz had been suspended from the school before for disciplinary reasons. There was a long history of bad behavior. He had attention from law enforcement, but he was not treated like a legitimate threat. In other shows I've discussed, there was an attempt to reduce in this Broward County school district. Broward County, by the way, is the constituency of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. It is this agency and the Sheriff Israel corrupt to the core. So in an attempt to reduce the school to prison pipeline, the district stopped reporting activities, unlawful activities on the part of students to law enforcement. And this kid was kept under the radar of local law agencies. And Attorney General Jeff Sessions had also admitted to the FBI, or admitted that the FBI had failed to act on numerous reports of erratic and threatened behavior on the part of Cruz. I think you remember, Jeff, there were some reports about statements on YouTube that he had made. Anyway, there was no reason for this guy to have been ignored for as long as he was. And despite the government failures at both the local and the federal level, the public debate predictably turned into the issue of gun control with regards to the focus on a ban of the military-style rifles, or also known as the assault rifles, as they're called. In one school, students, and if you go to my article, I have links here so you can see students were instructed to write letters to representatives asking them to implement stricter gun control regulations. There's a link, you can highlight that page and go, and there's a link to that story. So both sides are saying no one is really saying that the military weapons should be in the hands of civilians. Barack Obama, when he was president, had said weapons of war have no place on our streets, and our law enforcement officers should never be outgunned. Well, many in the conservative media pundits agree, and in the process, they are conceding a crucial point that was a central reason for the ratification of the Second Amendment, and that is the people must have the means by which they can resist a tyrannical government. These means are going to be rendered ineffective if we surrender the right to be on a level playing field when it comes to firearms. And I cite here Ryan McMakin from Mises Institute. He also cited Carl and me and our article on national reciprocity when he did one about decentralizing gun control. Love Mises.org. Go over there, follow Ryan McMakin. He's a brilliant writer. And I'm going to be discussing his article on the militia. And he talks about the origins of the militia going back to 17th century England, when Americans resisted the standing army sent by the king to crush dissent. So this really goes back to our pre-revolutionary era. McMakin shares the insight of British historian Marcus Canliffe regarding the origins of the American military institutions. They evolved as a result of compromises between a centralized military, which would be capable of suppressing dissent, and a reasonable force needed to maintain order. And a compromise was reached. First, a small regular force was to be maintained, and this was the actual foundation of the British Standing Army. The second was going to be a nationwide militia composed of civilians. Remember, every able-bodied citizen to be summoned in time of need. The militia was supposed to be under civil law, organized locally by the Lord Lieutenant of each county. So this is really decentralization. From the very get-go, we had ideals of decentralization. And in the colonies, the standing armies were actually viewed with not only skepticism, but with hatred, especially so after the British Army was sent an ultimatum. Well, they were sent as an ultimate enforcement mechanism, I beg your pardon, for the various taxes and other acts imposed on the colonies by the Crown. As the Constitution was being discussed and debated, one of the most hotly contested objects relating to the powers of the new Congress was its ability to raise armies. And Jeff, this part's for you. We threw in some Patrick Henry. I know you love your Patrick Henry. During the Virginia Convention, the Ratification Convention. Again, if you want to understand what the Constitution means, you do not look to left-leaning federal judges. You look to what the ratifier said. If you want to know what a contract means, look to what the parties intended. That's what was going on with the Ratification Party, or the Ratification Conventions. These were the people agreeing to a compact. So what did they mean? During the Virginia Convention, Patrick Henry observed that a standing army we shall have, also to execute the execrable commands of tyranny. And how are you to punish them? Will you order them to be punished? Who shall obey these orders? Will your mace bearer be a match for a disciplined regiment? The clause before you gives the power of direct taxation, unbound and unlimited, exclusive power of legislation in all cases whatsoever for 10 square miles over all places purchased for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and etc. What resistance could be made? Well, what he's saying here is he's rejecting the centralization of power. He feared what he called a central government, the power over both the sword and the purse. He smelled a rat, and he was right. He observed that any attempt to restrain the government in this instant would be madness, and thundered, "You will find all the strength of this country in the hands of your enemies. Their garrisons will naturally be the strongest places in the country. Your militia is given up to Congress." He concluded by asking, of what service would militia be to you, when most probably you will not have a single musket in the state, for as arms are to be provided by Congress, they may or may not furnish them. And that was, remember, Article 1, Section 8 provides Congress with the power to arm the militia. So what they feared was that the militia would also be disarmed by the very same Congress. So this is why you have to understand the Second Amendment is tied very much with the Militia Act. The proclamation he provides, in this proclamation, he provides a succinct summation for the general beliefs of a large portion of Americans during ratification. And this is, again, part of the Second Amendment. We have a lot more history in the article. I'm not going to go through all of it because you can read it, but I wanted to talk also a little bit about the Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights, that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. And as standing armies are kept in times of peace, they are dangerous to liberty and not ought to be kept up. The military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. And this is in direct contravention to what we have right now. The militias are pretty much non-existent and also put forth as loose bands of extremists by the media. So what we have to understand here is the founding generation had an immense fear of standing armies. James Madison, and we quoted this in our other article, said that a standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty. Fast forward to what we have today and see if this wasn't prophecy. St. George Tucker had also said, wherever standing armies are kept up and the right of the people to keep and bear arms is what is prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of discussion. And again, you can refer to more of that history in our National Reciprocity article. There's a book out by Stephen Holbrook. It's called The Founder's Second Amendment, and he describes Pennsylvania Senator William McClay's concerns. And these were written during the notes of the debates that would result in the enactment of the 1792 Federal Militia Act, namely that Alexander Hamilton and his faction were instigating war with American Indians and foreign nations to justify raising an army that would awe our citizens into submission. Roger Sherman of Connecticut. I'm giving you all these examples so you understand that it wasn't just a faction of maybe these Southerners like Patrick Henry that felt this way. This was across the colonies. This was something that they had a common thread that tied them together. Roger Sherman of Connecticut commented that man had an essential right to resist every attack upon his person or liberty by whomsoever made. So again, this is now, we're talking about rifles, semi-automatic rifles, and the acknowledgement that the people do not have a right to what we have in the military. Brian, you served in the armed forces. What are your thoughts on this right now? And we'll get back into the article a little bit more.
I have a couple of different thoughts on it. First is practicality. During my entire time in the military, I very rarely ever fired on full auto or even burst fire because it's inaccurate. So as a prepper who is interested in conserving my ammunition and all that, I really strongly go towards firing on semi-automatic. Now, that's just my personal view on how I believe as far as from a preparedness viewpoint. But in like reading your article the other night, and it's something that I've thought about for a while, and I did some research on this, is looking for what the definition of arms are, because, you know, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon. So really, what's the definition of arms? Because that's, I think, where a lot of it can take us. Not that we would get a just and fair ruling today on that definition, but is arms considered nuclear weapons, or does arms stop at maybe a full auto M4, or does it go into belt feds? I guess the biggest issue that I have right now is what is that definition of what arms are, and where do we go with it from there, if that makes sense?
And you know what? That's your statement. You don't even know this, but I got a question from one of my listeners, Andrew in Pennsylvania, said, I know my anti-gun friends are going to say, does this include the right to have a nuclear arsenal? And so the understanding really at the time was that arms meant that you would have the firearms available to the militia that the standing army had. But we have to remember that the purpose, one of the purposes of coming together was for a common defense. And as the nations across the world started improving their means of defending themselves, it just means that, of course, ours had to as well. So the practicality, remember, the purpose of coming together was for a common defense. So it would seem that if the purpose of this is to defend the Union, then they're going to have something on the par of our enemies. Does that go on to say that as a practical matter, it goes to the civilians? Well, I would say no, because first of all, they're not arms. But second of all, the practicality, who's going to set forth, who's going to be able to own those, who's going to be able to deliver them, it doesn't really make sense to me. I think it's a straw man argument designed to take away from the main point that if you think about defending against tyranny, the tyrannical government, the government coming through, not going to door, trying to take away our firearms. Do we think that we would use nuclear weapons? No, I think that's kind of a silly argument. But you still have what I consider a conundrum of a general government, the standing army, that does have these weapons available to use on the civilian population. Oh, our army would never, ever turn against its own citizens. Well, yes, in fact, they have. And we have multiple instances with them, one of which is erroneously called the Civil War. So I think that is a concern, but I don't think that's a practicality. So we're sticking to the argument that when it comes to firearms, I'm sticking to the fact that I believe that we should have every firearm available, practical or not. I wouldn't even own a select fire, meaning full auto. Again, I think it's inaccurate. And I had a friend that was another Army veteran over here the other day, and we were doing some shooting. And he said most people in the Army, if you see in the special forces, they don't use the spray and pray. They get up there and they shoot with accuracy. So anyway, so that was a little bit of how I felt on this. And I want to get into the definition of what assault rifles are. Mm-hmm. We have this proposition. We've continued to buy into this notion that we, the people, are incapable of bearing arms equal in power and effectiveness. And again, effectiveness, full auto, of that of the military, the standing army. So the definition in 1828 of a musket, the weapon used by the colonial militias, was defined as a species of firearms used in war. In other words, it was noted that it was given to civilians. The militia would have the same firearms as the military. Now, recently, Merriam-Webster has changed the definition to the following: any one of various intermediate range magazine-fed military rifles, such as the AK-47, that can be set for automatic or semi-automatic fire. And this is where they get particularly nefarious. A rifle that resembles a military assault rifle, but is designed to only allow semi-automatic fire. So now in the interest of expanding the ban on this weapon, we're going to say, we don't care what it functions like. We're going to judge it on how it looks. We call them in California the evil features when they decide whether or not they're going to ban these rifles. And we had a federal court in Massachusetts, and this is where we get into the legalities of this. And then we'll get more into the prepping part for anybody listening to Brian. I promise I'm not going to do this for the whole show. But a federal court in Massachusetts recently held that such rifles were not protected by the Second Amendment and that they may be lawfully subjected to being banned. So again, they look to, those that are seeking, look to restrict these as weapons of war, and they cite DC versus Heller. In this case, Justice Antonin Scalia explained that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in militia and to use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense within the home. people think that this is a very pro Second Amendment, pro gun rights case when it is the opposite. What they're implying is that assault rifles are not subject to Second Amendment protection. So we're seeing bans in local communities as well. So Patrick Henry's worst fears have materialized. The uneducated, people are uneducated in their own history. They're largely clueless about this. And the militia is every one of us. They are the people. They are the ones that are supposed to stand up against tyrannical governments. And when the average American, gleaning their understanding of the Second Amendment in particular, and American history in general, from agenda-driven academics and talking heads in the media and on talk radio, we capitulate these arguments. We're in the process of surrendering a fundamental tenet, and that is our ability to defend ourselves from personal assault as well as from a proven threat by the very government imposing these restrictions. From Waco to Wounded Knee, our founders are rolling in their graves by what we've done here. So let's turn a little bit now to the preparedness aspect of this. Again, you might not want to have a fully automatic rifle as your means of defending yourself. You might think they should be unlawful, but it is irrebuttable, I should say, that is in contravention to the intent of the Second Amendment and why we have it. So we got your, I think, again, covering about the nuclear weapons. I think we're in agreement. It does not cover that. It shouldn't be intended to, but we do have a very realistic risk of governments turning on their own people. 200 million people have died from government once they've been disarmed. But I think if we can focus on decentralization, we won't need these standing armies and imperialism around the world. Let's turn a little bit, because this attitude, this warlike attitude, we faced a few close calls and a lot of heated rhetoric with North Korea and recently with our actions in Syria. And my take when that happened a couple weeks ago and we sent those missiles there was, how is Russia going to respond? And I told Jeff, we need to get Brian on here and talk about what do you think would happen if this had escalated. Brian, you and I had discussed the unlikelihood that it really would, but let's say this heated up and we're looking at a hot war now with Russia. How do you think people can be prepared for such a situation?
Well, I think that people need to start off with their preparedness with doing a personal risk assessment and determining what could possibly happen to them. So if you're in California, you probably think of earthquakes. I know you and I are both from California. If you're in the South, you may think more along the lines of tornadoes or hurricanes and such. But when it comes to the greater war, is one, you want to be prepared for that. I mean, everybody tries to think, and it's this normalcy bias that, no, these things aren't going to happen. Well, it doesn't matter when. We've been in numbers of wars throughout our history. It's going to happen again at some point. So my view is I'd rather be prepared for it than hide my head in the sand and not be. So some of the things you want to do is have a plan to get out of the population centers and to get out quick, because if something does happen that triggers a mass exodus from a population center, you don't want to be stuck in the middle of it. Look at Hurricane Katrina, that people, they just got stuck. They ended up having to go to the, I believe it was the Superdome there, and hope for government assistance. So I think the first thing to do is do a good personal risk assessment, determine what you have to protect, what you have to protect it with, and what you have to protect it from, and then come up with some plans, some primary plans and alternate plans on how to deal with different situations, including what in the preparedness community we call bugging out, but getting out of your home and getting away from a population center if that's what's called for.
And that's one thing I want to tell people, because I have done that. I lived my life away from this in anticipation of something bad happening, but I did it in such a way I can still live a very normal, very happy life. And I'm close to cities, but far enough where I don't have to worry about people coming where I live. And I have a lot of people say, well, if the poop hits the fan, I'm just coming to your place. Have a plan where you can, if you do know somebody like me, that you can go, but please don't say, I'm just coming to your place. If you want to go to somebody's place, you better be prepared to contribute and bring supplies, store up food, have them ready to go, bring a lot of food to support yourself, because people might not have already taken into consideration the needs of those that are going to be coming. So be prepared to not only support yourself, but have a skill to offer as well. Don't come thinking that you can be dead weight. And for the love of God, if you're one of the people that caused this problem, don't even think for a nanosecond that preppers are going to welcome you. You mentioned a topic I want to touch on here also, normalcy bias, because that ties in with the survival mindset, because I think normalcy bias is our biggest enemy here. Couple quick examples, and I didn't intentionally do this, but they both involved concerts. The concert in Vegas, there was no plan for any such incident, and what happened was the concert organizers turned all the lights on when they knew something was amiss. Now the shooter was able to visibly see his targets. People thought that it was just part of the show. They stood around. They didn't get out of the way quick enough. You know, it's hard to, nobody's really going to go from concert to shooting, but it seems like there was some delay in really recognizing the threat. Another instance took place in a closed concert venue. A group called Great White was playing, and as the pyrotechnics indoors caught in with the soundproofing system padding in the walls, I think over 100 people died as the walls were going up in flames. There's video of this. People think, oh, well, it's just part of the show. Nobody got out in time. So normalcy bias, we don't like to get out of our comfort zone there. So have a plan, but it doesn't, again, have to be just for the war situation. Let's talk a little bit more about the mindset. What is a successful mindset, and what is one that will make you be your own worst enemy?
Well, I think in today's world, especially in our society, because after spending so many years overseas, I kind of look at our society as fantasy land. Yeah, we work and we get along, but it's all in this mutual agreement that everything happens and it's okay. And people tend not to like to think about the bad situations. So to me, a good mindset is someone that just starts off with the idea that, hey, something bad can happen. And I think part of the problem that we have in our society is when people think about bad things happening, they just, especially in today's, the snowflake era and all this, that they just get overwhelmed and it crushes them. A lot of people, they're like, I just can't think about bad things. Well, the reality is bad things are going to happen. If you think about it ahead of time, and you don't have to get into the super minutia, but if you just think about it and say, hey, this may happen. I may be in a mall and there may be an active shooter. I might go to a concert and the venue could catch on fire. If that happens, what am I going to do? Even just taking a few seconds when you first walk in somewhere to think about your possible plan if something happens, or a couple of quick plans, will do you wonders when something happens. You mentioned the Las Vegas shooting, which is where I'm living now. Yeah, a lot of people don't think about that. They don't think about what happens if something happens during the venue, but also our government, our local government. And this is where the reliance on government can be a bad thing, is people say, local law enforcement will keep me safe. Local law enforcement, they are overwhelmed all the time. Law enforcement officers try to do a good job, but they're overwhelmed. They can't plan for every eventuality. And before the October 1st incident last year, the shooting last year happened, had an officer said, well, what if somebody starts shooting out of a window of a casino? Well, because it's never happened, he probably or she probably would have gotten shut down by people. Before 9/11, people would say, well, what are the odds of people flying a plane into a building? Or, all these different things through our history. So I really think a good mindset is just opening your mind to the possibility that, yes, these things can happen. Bad people are planning to do bad things, and they're going to try to find advantageous ways so they're successful, just like here in Vegas. So I think being able to admit that bad things are out there, bad things are a possibility, and coming up with a quick idea on how to deal with them is a huge step forward.
And I think if you get into the habit of doing this, it becomes second nature and it doesn't take over your life. For instance, I think if we were having dinner in a restaurant with friends, people would not overhear us saying, okay, if a shooter comes in, we're going to get out that door. No, you take a look, you assess, and you get on with your life. But again, you just get into this habit of assessing the risk around you. For instance, if you're in a theater, know how you can get out. We had a shooting in Aurora, Colorado at a theater. Know where an exit is, and have a plan. So think about also when you mentioned people think that the police will just come. As you said, they're often going to be overwhelmed. If it is a calamitous situation, the odds, there was a big train wreck, I remember recently, and people were injured, bleeding profusely, lacerations. If you have an IFAC, if you have a tourniquet, you can render some assistance to people. You can give guidance to some people. And what we like to talk about is there's a difference between first responders and the immediate responders. So if you are in that situation and you are prepared, you can be an immediate responder and render some assistance. I'm not saying if you're not comfortable, don't pull your gun out and start shooting a shooter yourself if you're not trained, but be prepared to be of assistance, if not to others, at least to yourself and your family members. So you also talk about something, you have Mindset Mondays, and you ask people frequently what they do to prepare every day. What is an example? What are some examples? I should give you some more time of how people can do little things every day to make themselves more prepared.
Again, I think one of the things people need to focus on is just what's going on around you in your personal environment. And when I say environment, I mean not just, from an environmental type of look, but that could be an issue. You could have, if is it hot out? Will it snow? What will we have going on? But what are people in your environment looking like? When you walk out, I remember I was a firefighter in Southern California when the O.J. Simpson trial was going on, and the Rodney King trials. Well, when they tried the police officers and Rodney King, I was driving to renew my car insurance. When I got to the office, I got out of the truck, and when I walked into the office, you could cut the air with a knife. It was so heavy because the verdict had come out. Well, you can walk out in society and you can tell, is there something going on that doesn't seem right? And this is where our normalcy bias comes in. Typically what we'll say is, there really probably isn't anything going wrong. Or no, I see something happening, but I shouldn't assume that those people are doing something because it's not the right thing to do. Well, that's setting yourself up for failure. That's ignoring the problem. So if people can go out and just take notice of what's going on around you, and when you notice it, think it through and don't push it down as being some political correctness type of thought that you can't have. You're entitled to your thoughts. You're entitled to having those feelings to protect yourself. And it doesn't mean, hey, I see something that's happening and this person looks out of the norm, so I'm going to go over there and knock them out or something like that. No, it's maybe give yourself, keep more of an eye on what's going around. And I'm a big proponent, and I know we've talked about this on my podcast, is if you see something bad getting ready to happen, leave, get out of there. A lot of us today's society want to pull up our videos and use our smartphones to video it and what have you. But the best way to save yourself, your family, and friends is to get away from the situation, get away from the bad guy, establish time and distance between yourself and the event. So that way it's either affecting other people, but it's not affecting you.
On your show, we had a discussion about the Good Samaritan that saved the life of a police officer who was getting the living daylights beaten out of him. There was a very large gentleman on top of him, sitting on his chest. He had broken almost every bone in the officer's face, and they were fighting over his firearm. And this gentleman stopped the threat. He fired several rounds into the body of the assailant, and finally it took a headshot. This man was on steroids. It turned out he was on roid rage, and he saved the life of this officer, and there were numerous people around. You have to consider, and I think what he did was very valiant, but he paid very dearly for this. Of course, all the race baiting powers that be jumped into the fray. He had to defend himself. So what we had discussed on your show, if you assume the responsibility of saving somebody when a crime is being perpetrated, for instance, know your target, know what is beyond your target. What we had talked about on your show, every round you send has a lawyer attached to it. This gentleman was sued as a result of what he did, and he did not have the coffers of the city attorney's office and the city's funds to defend him. So think about that. I always advocate trying to get out of the way if your life is at risk. And again, if you want to try to save others, have a plan, train, and know what you're going to do ahead of time. I had a friend in Los Altos where I grew up, and people there are unarmed. You cannot really be armed in California. I always carry when I'm there, regardless. I have a way of disguising it. And she had said that she was in the bank and there was an armed robber that came in. And she said, "Oh, Susie, I was just thinking, what would have happened if you'd been there?" And the situation is, well, do you just get in a gunfight if this happens? You have to have a thought, a plan ahead of time. Or if this seems like this guy's just for show, do you let him do what he's going to do and get out of there and think about the different eventualities? But the point being, this bank was maybe a quarter mile from the police station. It took about 20 minutes for law enforcement to show up. So imagine if your home is even farther out, you don't know if police officers are going to get there right away. And if you're of the mindset that you do not want a firearm in your home, think about what somebody could do to you and your children in that amount of time. Do you want to be a victim if you cannot get out of that house? Do you want to be a victim, or do you want to maybe level the playing field? Talking about going back to the beginning of the session today. Do we want to be on a level playing field with the government? I think we do. I think it's silly to make yourself vulnerable in whatever situation we're in. So talk a little bit about maybe wilderness preparedness. I live out in the wilderness. What are some of the situations or concerns that somebody like me should have? You live in Las Vegas. Your needs for preparedness are going to be a little bit different from mine.
Sure. And that gets back to where people should do a personal threat assessment on themselves, or a personal risk assessment. In the wilderness, I think you have a lot different environment than I do, like you just said, right? So you could be hours away from law enforcement if something happens on your property, just like we spoke about, where you said, if an intruder comes into your house and they leave, you may actually have to go out and do something to handle that, because maybe they're going around to go outside and regroup and come back at you. So it goes into that mindset of really deciding where you're at and what you have going on. In your case, you have to be a lot more self-reliant. Now, in the city, you need to be self-reliant, but I know here in the city, typically, is if the power goes out, they'll probably have somebody to turn it back on within a day or two. And being a prepper, I'm covered for that. But I imagine, up in rural areas, you can end up going without power for quite some time. And so you have to be really self-reliant, and think about that in your planning process when you're going about preparing for the winter, preparing for the summer, or just getting established there. I found it interesting when I was living back in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. Before a snowstorm would come in, if you went to the market, 2 days before, the market was cleaned out. And there are people out there, and it just boggles my mind. And it's just because I am a prepper at heart and through, and that there are people out there that have less than a day's worth of food in their house because they eat out all the time, and they just have no ability to overcome a problem if it happens. And I just look at them, and it's like, wow, you are part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So always evaluate your individual area. Look at, you can talk to your local law enforcement, talk to your volunteer or your paid firefighters, talk to your EMS, see what some of the bigger problems in your area, what the local crime tendencies are, and then start making plans to hopefully deal with that. And getting in either my Facebook group, or there's hundreds of them out there for preparedness, getting in those groups, and there's a different group out there for everybody that fits their personality. And get in there and see what they say, what they think. But be careful of the people that say, oh, just deal with it on your own right now and do X if a bad guy shows up, or do this. You want to, just like with if you watch any of the media nowadays, you really want to take it with a grain of salt, and you want to do your own self-evaluation to see how it applies to you.
And, you can't plan this stuff, but I just got a text in from a good friend of the show, good friend of ours, Kevin Gutzman, sent a text that school was canceled in Western Connecticut State University because of an epidemic. So apparently 100 students came down ill, vomiting, fevers, And so they shut down the schools. So this is something else that people think, well, epidemic or pandemic, these things can't happen.
Sure.
Well, this was just a minor one. So for the next couple minutes before we run out of time here, what are some ways we can possibly avoid from something like this to a greater pandemic? Because you've got a medical background.
Sure. Well, I think in today's society, it's really difficult because people can hop on a plane in Central Europe and be in the United States in a major hub within hours. I just read an article the other day talking about typhoid where I think it was typhoid. It's a real, whatever it was a really serious disease. And they're down to only one antibiotic in the world is now being effective against that. And their concern is that all it's going to take is one more mutation of this disease and we will have nothing to combat it. Now, I take that and I extrapolate that out across all the other diseases. And because of misuse of antibiotics from doctors overprescribing or people not following their full term of antibiotics, we're in a position where diseases that we haven't seen in 100 years can possibly come back and are ready to just launch off into society again. So I think again, it's your situational awareness, really keeping an eye, like your friend sending you this text message, keeping an eye on, hey, is there something going on in Connecticut where they have an issue going on with disease? And then taking that into account when you go about your day. You know, I know we're a society where people shake hands. I do it all the time. But, you know, a handshake is that way that germs are transmitted. Think about that. You know, carry hand sanitizer with you. And when you go into a public area, are people coughing? What do you see? Again, and analyzing what people are doing. What are their eyes looking like? Are they sweating? Is there, you know, are they look nervous? What's going on with people? And you, like you said earlier, you don't have to walk around and be hyper vigilant and have it overcome your day. It's just when I look around, I look at a person, and basically if I see something that isn't normal for the environment, I take notice. And if I see a person that's hacking real bad, I've left stores when you see those people walk around, they're coughing on everything and just like, what are you doing? At work, I send people home if they come in sick. I'm like, go home and work from home. But taking responsibility for yourself and extricating yourself from a situation when you see something that's not normal happening.
Well,
Yeah.
hey, Brian, I just want to jump. I think I shared this story the other day because it piqued my interest. It's a typhoid outbreak in Pakistan, and it's a medication-resistant strain.
Yep.
So I was thinking, what happens if someone from Pakistan gets on a plane, 200 somebodies get on a plane and they hit transfers and they're going all over the world. Now this typhoid outbreak that's medication-resistant is all over the world.
Right. Well, and that's the case, right? So I actually worked in Pakistan for a while, and same thing as the rest of the world. I went down to the airport. I got on a plane load of Pakistanis, and I flew to the States. I'm in the States within 16 hours. So that vector for disease is it can move so rapidly around the world that, just like in this case with the typhoid, yeah, I think it's down to azithromycin is the only thing left that's affecting it. And one more mutation, they say that may not be effective. So then what's going to happen? Look at the Zika virus, you know, all this stuff. Diseases are traveling today because of the technology and everything we have that makes it easy to move about. And, you know, we have some very liberal policies as far as who can come hang out in our country. That doesn't help matters either.
Well, and we're seeing also treatment-resistant version of tuberculosis coming in across the borders as well. So yes, you're right. We have this mentality of some of the politicians that everybody should be allowed to come here regardless of the detriment that it might have to the people already being here. And this isn't a matter of one party or the other. They're both doing it. And the first obligation should be to protect the liberties of the citizens of the country in which they're serving the people for. So that's something to consider as well. We're about out of time. Again, Brian, remind people how they could follow you and join your Facebook groups. I love those pages because people can ask any question and you will get a multitude of responses from very knowledgeable people.
Sure. Just they can find me on any of my social media channels as Mind for Survival. If you go to Mind for Survival, just look me up, look up Brian Duff. I'm very open. I love hearing from people. I try to answer every email I get. And if people have questions, by all means, go in and post it and ask. And if we don't know the answer, I don't know the answer to everything, but we try to find it out. And it's a really good time with people like you and Jeff in the group. I think everybody would benefit from it.
Well, I'm delighted that you came on with me today. I'm going to put some of your podcasts again up on our feed so people can listen to them. Go over to Mind for Survival. Jeff Johnson, I want to thank you for producing the show today. I thought we were going to run over, but I think we can keep this into our hour time frame. I'm going to get into more of the Scalia interpretation of the Second Amendment and the Heller case in particular. And Heller set the precedence also for McDonald, which incorporated the Second Amendment against the states. Some people who are misguided think that's a really good idea, but we'll get more into that on another show. Brian Duff from Minds for Survival, former Army Ranger, and just skilled beyond all reason. Delighted to have you. I'm sure we'll have you back again. And I hope to see you at PrepperCon. All right, everybody, thank you for joining me today on a very special episode of the Wasatch Report. Jeff Johnson producing. I'm Suzanne Sherman here at the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. God bless you.